Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our wonderful event. I want to welcome especially some of the new people who are new to us, to PowHer. My name is Mary Luke, and I'm Vice President for Programs for PowHer New York. We're a statewide network of over 100 organizations in diverse communities across New York working for gender and racial justice. We work together on systemic and social change to attain economic equality for New York women, people of color, and gender expansive individuals. Before we start the program, I want to share a few tips on how you can participate. We invite you to use the chat box, and you'll find our full bios there. Please also ask your questions in the chat box. If you're on social media, please use @PowHerNY. And you can also reach us for questions at info@powherny.org. Today's conversation is grounded in the collective work of PowHer's network. In 2020, the network took on the challenge of documenting the needs of New Yorkers, women and families during the pandemic, and we strategized substantial solutions that would make our state a more equitable place in the economic recovery. That document became our roadmap to create inclusive gender justice in New York. It was authored by 50 organizations over Zoom during the pandemic, and it offers a vision for a paradigm shift and a plan. You will find it on our website, www.powherny.org, and we hope that you will read it and sign on. The conversation today on breaking the silence, ending sexual harassment and abuse in sports culture is taking place during the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, an annual campaign to focus on the issues of violence against women locally and around the world. We thank UN Women USA for co-sponsoring this event. This is the third and final in a series of virtual conversations on how cultures based in patriarchy and power sustain inequality, sexual harassment, and abuse, and how those cultures can and must change. Previous events turned a spotlight on the gendered cultures in political institutions in Albany and in the workplace. The conversation today focuses on the unequal environment in sports, its impact on the treatment of women and girls, and what policies and other solutions are needed to change the culture in sport to end gender-based violence. This series will culminate in a set of recommendations to Governor Kathy Hochul. We have two exciting speakers, Don McPherson and Deanne Keller, and at the end of the program, we will announce the winner of a copy of Don's book, You Throw Like a Girl, The Blind Spot of Masculinity. To kick off this discussion, let me introduce you to Karen King, our moderator. Dr. King is the Commissioner of Public Advocacy of Erie County and the Executive Director of the Erie County Commission on the Status of Women. She also serves on the Executive Committee of the University of Buffalo Gender Institute, the New York State Council for Women and Girls, and she's on the board of PowHer New York. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you, Mary, and greetings, everyone from Western New York, where it's a wintry, blustery day, but that doesn't deter us. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have these two esteemed panelists talk today about the culture of sport. We're going to be looking at the pipeline, how we get engaged in sport at a very early age, and then for some continue on through collegiate athletics, and for a very small percentage into the professional realm. But the sport is still male dominated by a sports culture, which Don and Deanne will talk about in a second. But we also want to look at the connection between sports culture, hypermasculinity, and violence, and what we can do to disrupt that culture and create new models that make the landscape more equitable and free of violence. So let me start by introducing our first speaker, our first panelist. Don McPherson, acclaimed former college and professional football player, is a national leader and advocate for the prevention of sexual and domestic violence. He is the author of You Thrill Like a Girl, The Blind Spot of Masculinity, and he uses sports culture to address complex social issues and to draw attention to the role men play in gender-based violence. Please welcome Don McPherson. We're going to just jump right in, Don. As someone who knows professional and collegiate sports from the inside and who's an educator working to understand and expand ideas and mores about masculinity, what is the relationship between traditional masculinity that is displayed in the culture of sports and violence, and especially men's violence against women?
Well, thank you, and Karen, and hello, everyone. You know, in thinking about that question, there's so many ways to answer about the culture of patriarchy as it pertains to sport, but also our, larger, American culture. And I remember, I was thinking about this, and I can tell you in so many ways, but I remember as a little boy that Monday Night Football was the event. It was the biggest thing that happened in the household and our family. I remember it was just a big deal for Monday Night, and that was the sport I played. And so everything around my life was that I was the most important thing in the house. I was the most important thing in school. On Fridays in high school football, the football team wore their jersey. We were homecoming was around the football game. There were all these things that sort of wrapped around the importance of football players and of sports that showed you that you were more important than everyone and everything else in your environment. And that carries through in so many ways, that the rhetoric inside sports that is all about this sort of masculinity I refer to as narrow masculinity: be tough and strong and don't back down. That was the rhetoric in sport, but that was also the rhetoric that made you a successful person outside of the game. And so it permeated everything you did as a guy, as a boy, but it permeated everything you did in the sport, but it also extended outside the sport, where you felt a sense of importance in the culture.
Thank you, Don. Sorry about that. You use the term narrow masculinity, and I think that's really a great way to discuss this, and how that definition or that frame is really inhibiting and contributes to a lot of what we are witnessing in terms of the problems and the challenges that athletes face, and the way it's enacted in the larger culture. Can you speak a little bit more about that idea of narrow masculinity?
I refer to narrow masculinity because my work is about engaging men and pulling men into the conversation. So to help men and boys see that the way that we define what it means to be a man is very, very narrowly defined, and therefore narrowly lived. That we have to be tough and strong, as I mentioned a moment ago, but also that we are impervious to pain. So we don't take care of ourselves, and we don't. I always say, if you ignore your own pain, if you ignore your own feelings and shut down your own emotions, then you're less capable of understanding someone else's. You're less capable of extending those feelings to other people. And so as boys, we learn at a very early age that, and Bell Hooks talks about this, about the psychic self-mutilation that boys go through, that if we don't do it, the larger culture does it for us. Well, sports has become that larger culture that asks boys to shut down their feelings, to play through pain, to be tough, and extends that out in our lives. And so that narrow masculinity, as I call it, is how we as men tend to live our lives in this very narrowly defined understanding of what it means to be a man. And the work that I try to do, and it's funny because sports tells you that the more you can do, the better you're going to be. The more skills you have, the better you're going to be. And yet as men, the fewer skills we have is the more that is the way that we define masculinity.
That's a really interesting way to put it. Is it fewer skills, or is it a specific type of skill that is
Well,
maybe more privileged?
it's the fewer skills that we exhibit. In other words, and by the way, you use the word privilege. There is a privilege to it. There's a privilege to not dealing with your emotions, right? Because you don't have to get involved in uncomfortable conversations. There's a privilege to our silence, and that is the ultimate of male privilege, is our silence. And I tend to talk about privilege in the way that I just mentioned about sports. It's not as something that I have that I need to give to you, although that's the way that we tend to think about it, because most people who have privilege don't know they have it until someone who doesn't have that particular privilege points it out to them. The first chapter of my book is Black Man with Privilege. As a Black man, yes, marginalized identity, but as an athlete, my privilege trumped everything. My privilege was off the chart as an athlete, as a college athlete, as a professional athlete. And so privilege is sort of fluid, but what privilege does is it keeps you from growth, because A, you don't know you have it, so you don't know what you need to work on. And that's why I say that the privilege of silence of men is that if we don't extend or exhibit and practice the full range of who we are, our vulnerability, our empathy, our care, our love, our sensitivity, our emotions, if we don't practice that, then we don't grow in that. And that's why that privilege is a blind spot for men, that we don't grow in those things. If we're so narrowly defined, we don't grow in our ability to be emotionally competent and our ability to be vulnerable, and which makes us better in our relationships. So there's this blind spot to what masculinity is, that in our privilege is also our lack of growth.
It's a really interesting idea, turning the idea of privilege sort of on its head, that it inhibits growth, because that's not typically the way people think of privilege, but that's really an important point, which leads me to my next question about the work that you do. So it sounds like what we're at this point where we really need to start developing new models of how to be. So tell us a little bit about that work that you're involved in now.
Well, it may sound a little controversial coming from the topic of this conversation, but one of the things that I say to men, and I'll share it with an exchange that I had with a student recently, where I say that in order for us as men to really have a sustainable conversation about who we are as men and how we need to grow, we need to relinquish some of the rhetoric that we hear so much now, that we're talking about masculinity because of issues of men's violence against women. And I say to men, we have to remove that responsibility, the chivalry of we're here having a conversation around men to protect women. Because if our job is to protect women, then don't mess with my violent masculinity, right? I'm going to need that to protect my woman. And I had an exchange with a student the other day who said, well, a real man protects his woman. I said, what if a man doesn't have a woman? And let's talk about the possessive nature of that statement, right? She's my woman, right? I said, what if someone doesn't have a family? Does that make them a real man? And I was several hours away from where my children are, and I said, I'm not near my daughters. I can't protect them. Does that make me less of a man? And then he kept saying, well, a man has to protect the woman. I said, from what? And then ultimately he said the world, and then ultimately it was from other men, right? So we as men need to do the work on us. Right? Even though ultimately it is about the prevention of violence against women, but we need to do the work on us. And in that is our growth as men. And so for order to men to grow, we really need to remove the chivalry that we're having the conversation around masculinity to protect women. We're having the conversation around masculinity to help grow men and advance a full understanding of our wholeness and living in our authentic wholeness. And by the way, I think that is a much more sustainable conversation with men. I reject the term toxic masculinity. Toxic, before we used the term toxic to talk about relationships and masculinity, we used the term toxic to talk about waste. Waste that was not even suitable for garbage. You had to separate toxic waste from garbage. You had to eliminate it. And that's what we're telling men now, that their identity, the very notion of masculinity is toxic and should be removed, as opposed to saying, no, it's okay to be tough and strong and don't back down, because women do that in athletics and government and in a number of different ways. But it's also good for men to be loving and caring and vulnerable and emotional. And we have to build up. And that's sort of like what I said about sports. If you can pass block and you can't run block as an offensive lineman in football, you're not gonna be around very long, right? You have to be able to do it all. If you can run but you can't catch, you're not gonna be a great receiver. You have to be able to bring all of your skills to whatever you're doing. And that is a part of what we're trying to encourage in men.
So the development of a broad skill set.
Correct. And when you develop that broad skill set, what's embodied in that is being vulnerable and being emotional and being empathetic. And those are the skills that we want men to develop in the work that we do around men's violence against women.
Thanks, Don. And you keep referring to men. So, I'm very interested in this pipeline because sport culture and the engagement in sport plays such a huge role in our culture from the time when, kids are little. I mean, right? 3, 4, 5 years old, they get engaged in this process, and some of them stay with it throughout high school and maybe through collegiate sports. And then I said in a small percentage to professional, but it is always with us. It's an integral part of the way children learn how to socialize at a very early age. So how soon should we start this work that you're referring to, reframing these ideas around masculinity? How soon?
I think I was talking to my children the day they were born, hours after birth. And I'm serious, hours after birth, I was instilling in them that there's something greater than themselves, and that this is a part. And I do think that, and I've been saying this for years. If a child is old enough to prop up and sit in front of a television, we need to be countering a lot of the information that's coming across, whether it's real or not. In other words, whether it's deliberately coming across as being sexist and patriarchal, we need to understand that they're taking in messaging, and so we need to engage. And that's one of the title of my book is "You Throw Like a Girl," because I would ask boys, what was the worst insult you heard as early as you heard it? And I go back to the film The Sandlot. It's a very innocent film, and the ultimate insult was levied in The Sandlot: you play ball like a girl. And that notion, that was the ultimate insult. And so it needs to happen at a very, very early age. And you talked about our sports culture, is where we learn to socialize. I'm a cynic about sports culture, and it's why I love it. I mean, I'm a cynic about things that I love. And the sports culture in this country has been out of whack for a very, very long time. These are the students. I was just talking to a group of students, athletes, a few days ago at a university, and these are students who have been specialized. They've been playing the same sport since the time they're 5. It's just that sport. The sports culture, the youth sports culture, has not been helpful in this regard, and in its role as an entity that nurtures and teaches young people how to socialize. It's almost done just the opposite.
So it sounds like you're advocating to start this education early as perhaps a component when they're playing Little League or Melot or whatever, to that be part of the component of their training.
We talk about, I talk about the outsized, and when I mentioned Monday Night Football the other day, we talk about the outsized importance of sports in our culture. If it's that important, we cannot leave it to chance that just because a kid plays a sport, they're going to learn all these social skills. That's why I said it's just the opposite. There was this notion that sports builds character and teamwork and lead. No, it doesn't. It doesn't do any of those things. In fact, we're seeing the byproduct of what youth sports and travel sports and club sports at the young age is doing on the college level. Now you have college student athletes who will just quit their team in the middle of the season because they don't like the way things are going for them. And so I didn't get the starting job, so I'm going to quit and leave my team. That's not what sports taught me. That's not what sports is supposed to be all about. But because we have travel teams and people can go, well, I don't like this team. I don't like this coach. I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm not going to learn to communicate. I'm not going to learn to respect authority. I'm not going to learn to get along with people that don't look like me. I'm going to just move somewhere else. That's what youth sports has done. And we're seeing it at the collegiate level, where I went to Syracuse. I was starting quarterback and wide receiver at the beginning of the season this year, quit. Now they call it going into the transfer portal, but they quit the team because they don't like the way things are going for them. So the sports culture has not taught all those things that we all the altruism that we thought and we think and associate with it. It really hasn't. It's made it a very selfish endeavor because of the way that it operates at the youth level. That's my sports rant. I know that's another.
Thank you. And we're going to have an opportunity to circle back after we speak to Deanne, and then the two of you will have an opportunity to weigh in on these ideas with a little more depth. But thank you for sharing that information. And I'm now pleased, and it's a great segue because we were just talking about collegiate sports. I'm pleased to introduce our next guest speaker. Deanne Keller is the Senior Associate Athletic Director and Senior Women Administrator at the University at Buffalo. Deanne has a long and distinguished career in collegiate athletics, including at the Ncaa as the Associate Director of Championships and Alliances, and at St. Louis University as the Associate Director of Athletics for Administration prior to coming to UB. Welcome, Deanne. We're so happy you're with us today.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm grateful for the opportunity. Don, I think I could listen to you all day.
So let's just get right into it. Collegiate athletics is a big part of the college experience, but also a major enterprise that is deeply embedded in American culture. As an administrator, what are your biggest challenges in addressing the culture of sexual harassment within collegiate athletics?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we have that, we talk about this every single day. I mean, first and foremost, Division 1, 2, or 3 student athletes, are recognized as student leaders on campus. So there's already an enormous amount of pressure put on them to be successful and to almost be put into a box of what that's supposed to look like. When we look at, the sexual harassment within college athletics, the big thing is, we can do all we want to do in the recruiting process, but sometimes we don't know everything about the student athlete or just the general student that comes to campus. And there's many times that then we have to kind of, unravel, or untangle, the ball of, or, the web that's, surrounding the particular student athlete. I think there's a lot of things that, we do from a training perspective that opens up the conversation, a conversation that many of our students may not have had before they arrived here, to talk about what their experiences have been. There's statistics out there that, show that student athletes showing up or students showing up at college universities have probably encountered some type of sexual assault, sexual violence prior to them arriving on campus. And if it hasn't happened, then there's a statistic that also shows that it could happen within their first 2 semesters of coming to a college campus based on, based on experiences that, they're encountering for the very first time. The challenges are opening up, and how do you establish that relationship of trust, and who is that trust with, to start having the conversations if there's been an experience, or having further conversations in our training about bystander interventions of, how do you stop it before it's happening? And I know Don, speaks about this within his book too, but how do you change the narrative? How do you not just say, how do you break, the chain of reaction that could happen when you're out at a bar and you're under the influence of alcohol? And how do you, continue to say, hey, come home, if it's your roommate, hey, you know what, now's not a good time. You can talk to him tomorrow. Let's go home tonight. We'll have that conversation later. We do a lot of education even around alcohol. Because, with the drinking age being 21, if people started drinking in high school, they always try to hide it, from their parents. You try to hide it from, your relatives or your guardians. And so how do you have healthy conversations about what are the influences of alcohol and what does it do to you physiologically and psychologically when you are under the influence? How do we, so there's many, so that's another challenge that's faced within athletics, are the outside influences that happen and are the result of why we have some of these sexual harassment, incidences on college campuses. One is not just with our student athletes, but having the conversation with our coaches and staff about what are some of the red flags to look for, and how do you engage in that conversation, not just within the locker room, but just on an everyday basis when you're having conversations with our student athletes. Could be within our sports medicine, could be within sports performance. We need to normalize the conversation so it's not always a threat when it happens.
Thanks. So while women have gained access to significant leadership opportunities within college athletics, and certainly you're a prime example of that, it's still a very male-dominated field that is I guess I would say is steeped in a masculinist culture. What can male leaders do to challenge or change this culture and actively support and advocate for a shift in culture?
Yeah. I think it's, kind of, if you look across the, the enterprise of college athletics, when you look at our Power 5 schools, there's 65 athletic directors. I think 6 of those positions are held by women. And most recently of Nina King that was hired at Duke University and should have been there for a long time. I think there's many things that we need to do. Is number one, you don't have to necessarily have knowledge of every sport to be an administrator. Administrators are good listeners, they're collaborators, they're leaders. They understand the world as an organization, not just as a particular sport. So I may not know the X's and O's of football, but it doesn't mean that I can't have conversations with our football, coach about the sport, about how do you lead and develop coaches, how do you lead and develop young men and women. So I think first we need to understand that it just because football is played majority by men doesn't mean that women don't have an understanding of the sport or how to lead it. So we need to break the stereotypes. We also need to look at our unconscious bias when we start hiring. So what does it look like? What are some of those other characteristics and qualities we need to look in leadership? Do we, could we look at from a standpoint, the Ncaa equivalent of the Rooney Rule or the Russell Rule that was adopted by the West Coast Conference when we're looking at diversity in our hiring, and what's our commitment going to be to that? Making sure that we have unrepresented populations within our candidate pools. Secondly, I think our leaders have to be part of the solution. Looking not just at current athletic directors, but looking at our university presidents and chancellors. I mean, ultimately, they have the power of making these hires, and they need to be engaged at that front line of the leadership during the search processes. The other part is our search firms. I mean, anymore, search firms are being hired to run these searches to, for athletic directors as well as coaches positions. How do we continue to educate them and working with other organizations out there to make sure that we're putting forth the names of females, in those search pools. Third, I think we need engagement in the conversation to address the systematic gender inequity in sports leadership. That we have to be united in how we support our student athletes and the organization and the industry. We need to start giving people such as me opportunities that are maybe considered more male dominant roles in supervision of male sports, get more women involved in the development opportunities and with looking at and working with overall university budgets.
We're going to transition and bring the both of you together, but I just want to follow up on something you said. The search firms, they do this initial vetting process. So that's a really good point, because that is part of the pipeline that we don't often think about. So by the time a candidate gets to you, they've already been semi-vetted. But what do you think needs to happen to get more women actively engaged in pursuing administrative careers in collegiate athletics?
It starts with also being role models, for our current student athletes and our staff. I mean, many times when you go into a particular field, especially in athletics, you're sometimes pigeonholed into a compliance position or an academic position or in a marketing position. And how do we help our young staff members give them some exposure to some of these other responsibilities? The other part is, as females, a lot of times we're not willing to move for the job. We get very comfortable where we're at because we feel like, we've already proven ourselves in one particular position. I don't want to have to go through that all again. And, and being able to go in and ask for, the responsibilities that you're not getting. And it may not be within your role, but how can you look at the outside community and get involved in something? So if you don't have development experience, can you go work with an organization, a non-for-profit, and develop some of that development or, financial experience that you may not be getting in your current job? How do you get some of those transferable skills? With the search firms, I think they're getting better. There's different conferences out there. I just attended a conference, and for the first time, the organizer was like, we have more females today than we've had in any other conference up until that point, which is great, but at the same time, it was really sad to hear that. That there's still women who have been in this business for 25 plus years that haven't had an opportunity to get a seat at the table.
Thank you. And I do want to spend a little more time talking to both of you about the role male leaders can play in changing the culture, because they still seem to predominate and they still inhabit a lot of positions of power, certainly at the president and the chancellor level. It seems to be, I mean, not exclusively male, but that is also still fairly male dominated. So I'm going to ask Don to come back. There you are. Hello. And I know I'm seeing some questions come into the chat box. We will get to those questions in a bit. I just want to take a little bit of a deeper dive in terms of some of the challenges. We talked about the pipeline. We talked about, we need to start training or exposing kids to these ideas, much earlier than by the time they get to college, because by the time they get to college, I mean, most of their identities are already formed. I'd like the two of you to talk a little bit more about what those models would look like. If you were able to create a model that started, if you front-ended a model when a kid first gets interested in sports, what would it look like in terms of developing a different type of sportsmanship or sportswomanship or whatever word you want to use? What would that look like? Don, let's start with you.
I've worked, I live on Long Island. I've worked with New York State for a number of years around the state, and physical education, health and recreation for years, working with schools. And we've always tried to instill learning standards into into athletics in schools. And I think that needs to be a part of it. I think it needs to be a part of if you're going to participate in sports, these are going to be the things that you're going to learn. And one of what's kind of interesting is that sports culture is such a misnomer, I think, because there's so many subcultures within sports. And one of the things for boys is I always say that the business of sport is not interested in and has nothing to do with developing athletes. And so what the business of sport is interested in doing is making more consumers. So getting boys into video games and boys into fantasy leagues and all the things that boys get involved with. And it is in many ways targeted to boys and not to girls in that regard. And I don't know the research if it exists on girls' participation in those kinds of areas of sports. But most of the women who I know who are engaged in sports played sports up until the college level, and then got interested in administration or got interested in physical training or some aspect adjacent to actually participating. And I think that's what's in many ways what needs to be also instilled in girls at a very early age, is to be a sports administrator from an early age, to be a part of the business of sports at an early age, not just a consumer of sports.
Yeah,
when you look at the model too, I think we got to look at our youth coaches, the education that's provided to our youth coaches. Many of them are parents, and all we're doing is we're coaching is what we learned. So how do you break that cycle and provide the education piece? And how do we celebrate other successes besides wins and losses? Looking at a lot of times my pick last for the team, or I know many in youth programs now you're trying to balance out the teams. My daughter played club volleyball, and you have the ones, the twos, the threes, the four. How do we people know if you're on the better team? How do we maybe get rid of even how we classify some of those teams, so every team is important, not just the ones where you're putting the most emphasis on? If I'm a club team owner, how do I provide educational programs for my parents about being spectators and about supporting my student or my athlete and their successes overall, rather than just pushing them into one particular sport? Really looking at what sport does besides, how you gain in your athletic ability. what else are those skill sets that you're being taught through sport, and how do we emphasize those at a very young level?
Right. So I just want to shift gears a bit now and talk about, the current situation with addressing harassment. I mean, we know that there's a long history of harassment and abuse that has existed in collegiate and professional sports. It's really come to light in the past couple of years. And definitely this idea of fear of retaliation plays a part in it. Let's start with at the collegiate level, Deanne, what types of policies or practices have to be changed to eliminate this horrible experience that many athletes, young women, young men face when they get engaged in collegiate athletics?
There's so much programming that goes on. I mean, there's so many laws that universities have to abide by, whether it's the Clery Act reporting, Title IX, you got the Women or the Violence Against Women Act. New York has the 129B. I mean, there's so many different, we focus so much on laws and checking the boxes on our educational pieces. We need to really look at the educational pieces out there on what they're being offered. There's some great companies that a lot of universities, are connected with to provide these educational opportunities. And then universities also have some coordinated collaborative approaches to the training, but training only goes so far. Our student athletes have so many requirements that they have to meet, whether it's in their sport, regarding compliance, in their educational pursuits too. I think we need to open up those conversations. We need to meet them where they're at. Speaking at UB, I mean, I think we do a really good job. We have a coordinated approach with our violence prevention team that involves entities across campus. We have trauma-informed trained police officers that are involved in our training. I think we need to continue to assess and address some of the emerging issues that are out there. And we can't be afraid to share resources. I think the other interesting part is when it comes to, sexual violence in the Ncaa, and the Ncaa has so many policies and procedures, and, they look at student athletes' eligibility. From an institutional standpoint, we're required to test every year regarding our training regarding sexual assault and sexual violence. We need to make sure that our coaches, our student athletes, our staff is trained in it. We also have to, make sure that they understand bystander training. They also have to know where to go and report to. And we do a really good job at that. We've started a real response partnership that it's an anonymous reporting system. It's real-time reporting for our student athletes to share key issues and concerns. I think the other part is, looking at the Ncaa, we're now going to have to ask incoming student athletes to disclose whether or not they're involved in a disciplinary process or a criminal investigation prior to, participating in sport. The interesting part is, as an institution, we have to determine what their penalty is going to be. The Ncaa doesn't have a standard penalty across the board. So every institution has the ability to instill that a little bit differently.
You focused a lot on the requirements of students. Do you think there are enough requirements or oversight in place for the people who are in positions of power, administrators, coaches, the people that, quote, are entrusted to care for these students?
That's a great question. Obviously, they have to go through the same training as our student athletes. That's where administrators are really important. We have a sport administrator assigned to each of our coaches. So individual meetings with our coaches and our coaching staff and providing that training is, particularly important. But we, just like our student athletes, just like our coaches and our staff, I mean, we can't monitor them 24/7. And so there is an integrity, issue that you have to, that's always out there. And, there are background checks that, we do for incoming staff, especially with staff that's working closely with our student athletes. But this is where we really have to open up conversations with our student athletes and empower them to share their experiences with us.
Thank you. Don, speak a little bit more about that, and maybe the way that plays out in the professional sector.
I'd rather go in the other direction, Karen, because I think
Okay.
what's really important in what Deanne said was that there were two things that she said that were really important. One is that most of the coaches on the youth level are parents. And so you heard all of the requirements that she has to go through at the University of Buffalo, because I was on the Ncaa Board of Governors Commission that mandated that athletic departments attest that they've done something. I was on that committee that came up with that policy, and we never said what that something was, so there's no uniformity. So there's no common language. There's no common understanding of how we have these conversations. And so we have all these regulations, but there's no common language. And we in the field of advocates and activists and scholars in and around these issues do the general public a disservice, because we come up with a different term every other year. And we come up with a different standard every other year, whether it's legally or in the field. And we have to come up with common language that we're using at the youth sports level, so that and then we have to require, you have to have more qualifications to do hair and nails in a salon than you do to be with a child for 6 hours a day as a coach. And so we have to create some standards of responsibility for parents and other people who want to be youth coaches. And let's face it, they're there because of their child, more cases than not, but they're also there in charge of other children. And so we have to find ways to put qualifications on the people who have access to our children, and then give them the same information, the same responsibilities that a coach at the University of Buffalo would have. And so that child who is going to one day hopefully be at the University of Buffalo as a student athlete is learning those things before they get there. Is learning those and is also going to be less vulnerable if they're getting that information, and parents will be more equipped and better equipped to be able to educate their children and the children in their care.
Which is a perfect segue, because we're going to take some questions from the audience in a moment. But to that point, both of you can weigh in on this. What would you tell parents or guardians, to challenge or help change the sports culture? Because of course, parents come to this, they come to the field with their own set of expectations and their own biases. So what would you tell them?
We have this really twisted relationship with sports in American culture. We think that sports builds teamwork and collaboration and leadership, and it's all BS. It's always been BS. It's always been, it doesn't make you a better person. It doesn't make you a better man or a better woman. It's activity, it's physical activity, it's fun, it should be fun. I've actually had a parent many years ago say, what if my son's not good enough to play? And I asked her, how old is your son? She said he was 8. There's no such thing as not being good enough to play if you're 8. There's no such thing not being good enough to play if you're 80. It's play, and it's supposed to be that. And I think that we have put such an outsized importance on sports. And I think it's, what would I say to parents? I said, if you're not there for your child to have fun, full stop, nothing else after that, you're there for the wrong reason, because that's all it is. And I will tell you that the only reason that I played professional sports, and the only reason that I was successful as an athlete, had nothing to do with any coach, had nothing to do with my parents, other than the DNA and the God-given ability that was in the DNA that they passed on to me. Full stop, period. There was not one coach who made me run faster. There's not one coach who made me more accurate throwing a football. There's not one coach who made me love the game or love playing any more than another. I loved it because I enjoyed doing it. Just like my daughter loved to draw. She loves to do it, and she puts her time into it. Period. She has the talent to do it. I can't draw. I can't draw a stick figure, but she has the talent to do it. But in some ways, we've commodified this activity to a point where we've made it something more important than it actually is.
Deanne, thoughts on what to tell parents and guardians?
Yeah, I like what Don said about play. I think we also have to demystify that every every young player that is out there participating that's going to get a college scholarship. And I think a lot of times, if you see some, promise within your son or daughter, that you're also then thinking, oh, well, eventually if I keep investing in this, my investment, the return on my investment is going to be a college scholarship. Very few student athletes at the collegiate level are on athletic scholarship. Some are on portion, some are on zero. I mean, there's only certain sports that actually offer full rides anyway, and they're for 1 year. And I think there's, this misunderstanding that there's a 4-year guaranteed scholarship. I mean, there's no such thing. So I think we need to really understand why we're putting our children in sports. Is it really for them or is it for you? And then getting back to, sports provides so much more than just that satisfaction on winning. What are those other attributes you're really trying to develop in your child?
Great. Thank you both. And I'm going to take a couple questions from our audience. I'm just looking at the chat box right now. I'll start with a short one. This one's for Don. Any thoughts about the safe sport curriculum?
I am not familiar with it.
Deanne, are you?
I know a little bit about it. A lot of it's done through the youth level. There's also a misunderstanding that safe sport also is oversees and has responsibility to all of our NGBs, national governing bodies, for our Olympic sports. There is some curriculum involved for those that are, with coaches, that they have to go through a safe sport program and report to it. A lot of that, there's certain level of coaches that do that, but it's not applicable to every youth sport across the country.
Okay. Here's a question. Don, what have you learned about working with men and boys to educate and stop gender-based violence? What are some of the key takeaways that you've learned?
The key takeaways of working with men and boys
to challenge gender-based violence.
It's almost like I don't even know where to begin. That's a very, very big, broad, very broad question. I don't know if there's key takeaways. I think it's, like I said, it's an awkward question. I don't even know.
Let me reframe that. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges in working with boys and men to help them understand that connection between gender-based violence and sports culture? And what are some of the ways you've created programmatic models to intervene?
I think I take sports out of this conversation. I'm sorry. I know that this is a connection to sports, and this is the problem of gender-based violence and men's violence against women. It extends so far beyond sports. I mean, you can get into religion, you can get into government, you can get into our school systems. So many ways in which patriarchy and sexism and misogyny teaches boys that girls and women are less than. This is why, again, I go back to talking about the language that we hear as very young boys, and when I mentioned bell hooks earlier, that boys learn that to be a man, you have to remove your emotion, you have to remove your humanity. To be a real man, you have to be tough and strong and don't cry and don't back down. That narrowness of masculinity that I talk about, the way that narrowness is learned and maintained is through misogyny. You learn. I always say that we don't raise boys to be men, we raise boys not to be women or gay men, because we're constantly telling boys what not to be. Don't be a sissy, don't be all the kind of effeminate and homophobic slurs that follow that rhetoric. And sports is a place where it provides a platform for those things to be taught and those things to be perpetuated. But there are, I once quoted many years ago the number of restraining orders in New York City, and none of them were athletes. They were men. They were men generally. And it's very easy to point to sports, because sports is this place where it plays out and it looks very obvious. And by the way, where it's rewarded, we reward men who are athletes, who are tough and strong and play through pain and all those things. So there's a meritocracy to the narrow masculinity in sports culture. And you know, someone said to me recently, you know, does the NFL have a masculinity problem? I said, no, masculinity has an NFL problem. In other words, that's perpetuating this notion that that's what a man looks like. It's one of the few places where that still is rewarded. And that's the problem with where we go in the conversation. And the conversation for men has to be broader than just ending men's violence against women. Because if we're talking to men about masculinity, where we want to get them to expand that definition of masculinity, then we have to remove the responsibility of protecting women, right? Because as I said earlier, if that's the only reason we're talking to men about masculinity is the protection of women, then don't take away my violent masculinity. And so there needs to be a robust conversation with boys and men about what it means. And I refer to it as aspirational masculinity. What do we want for our boys? What do we want for them to live their whole loving, empathetic, loving, whole authentic selves?
Thank you. Deanne, you work directly with college athletes, and you know, mostly probably young men, but not exclusively. What do you see in terms of the landscape? Has it changed? Has there been a shift in terms of the way athletes who identify as male understand masculinity? Do you see any shifts?
I think because we're having the conversation, there's more awareness around it. But I think we need to take more time into, you know, really working with not just our men, you know, our men on some masculinity issues and, you know, issues, you know, the narrative around it, but also with our women on conversations of empowerment and ability. You know, I think that, you know, we have a Stronger Together task force, and one of our pillars is masculinity. And Donna, make sure I don't say toxic masculinity, because it's much more than that. Because it's not something that we need to say that you're doing wrong. It's just, you know, we've perpetuated for so long what these skill sets, what these attributes should be that we want to champion, that we just need to reframe the conversation around it. And we also need to work with our media counterparts that sensationalize things that don't need to be sensationalized. And let's be honest, athletics makes the news. So you know, you could have an athlete that does X and the general male in the population that does X. And you know, the athlete's going to get the notoriety, you know, you're going to get the publicity, I should say, not notoriety. No, I can't even speak on that word today. And so how do we help educate even our media? I understand they want their articles read and all of that, but how do we help change the narrative even about the stories that are being told?
Thank you, Deanne. And that is sort of the proverbial, what is it, the elephant in the room. I know we had intention of having some media representation at this event, but we're not able to get it. But Don, I know you talk extensively about this. What role is the media playing in the perpetuation of this sports culture, and how can they become better allies at changing the narrative?
Sports media is, by the way, you know, Deanne, you were talking about this earlier. I worked with Pam Ward, who was the first woman to do play-by-play for a college football game. And I remember the criticisms that she was getting before the game, people calling radio shows, what's this woman doing calling a football game? And what does she know? And I went to Syracuse University, and we have some of the greatest sports announcers in the business. Mike Tirico, Sean McDonough, and Bob Costas. Not one of those guys touched a ball when they were at Syracuse. Not one of those guys played a game. They may have played pickup in the gym, I don't know, but none of them were athletes. And none of them came from being intense sports or athletes. All, you know, great announcers, but they don't know any more about the game than Pam Ward did as an announcer. And so there's this notion that, and that's why I go back to, if we're not nurturing that, the skills to be an announcer or to be an administrator, you know, the media, it's always, you know, it's funny when we like to talk about media as this other entity. The media are us. And we have to see that. We have to recognize that they come from our culture. They, as I said earlier, when young boys are playing video games and doing fantasy leagues, those boys become announcers. and they speak in the same tone, with the same rhetoric that they heard as little boys, as they heard it in their household. And so we have to recognize that the media are us.
Great point to end on. And that really gets back to that larger conversation we had the other day about creating an ecosystem for social change. I want to thank the both of you for your time and your brilliant insights today. And we are just about out of time. So I'm going to hand it over to our fearless leader, Bev Neufeld, to take us home. Thank you both. Bev, you're on mute.
Goodness. I just saying thank you so much, Don and Deanne, for that insight, and Karen for your amazing questions. I have to say that I think this is a third in the series, and this was a home run. So we started this series in June with our very timely conversation about dismantling sexual harassment in Albany. And we identified so many legal and policy issues and need for systemic change. And the second part of the conversation was in September, when we turned our focus to the role that men can play in being allies to women and transforming culture so that we can end gender-based violence. And today we're tackling sports. I think it's so clear that sports is that ecosystem, and it reflects what's happening in our country, in our world. And your insights really gave us a window into that, as well as suggestions and ideas for what we should be taking on. I think you know that we're going to be putting recommendations together for the governor, and if you have any recommendations, Don and Deanne, please do send them. But Power will be a voice in this conversation continuing. And you've given us a lot of information, ideas for how we can make a difference in this and how we can push for change. This series has been such a success because of the vision and the passion of Karen King, the tenacity and work of Mary Luke, the tech magic of Abby Grimshaw, our online manager, and really an amazing programming committee with one of our top volunteers, Nancy Hafner. So we all thank you for making this happen and for all the work it took, to do this. And this was, I think, a great success because of our community. You, everyone who's showed up and had these conversations, organizational leaders, advocates, and we're coming together to learn and to collaborate, but ultimately we need to take action, and that's really our next step. It's what we do. And I have to say, the work ahead that we have in 2022 is urgent. Power partners have already agreed on some critical issues that we want to take on and push forward. And our goal is nothing less than an anti-racist, gender-focused, equitable recovery. And we invite everyone here, to be part of that. We'll send you the priorities soon. And we really hope that you can take a role in pushing those forward. Become a volunteer, become an organizational member. And if you want to support programs like this and the transformational work that Power is doing, we hope that you'll consider an end of the year donation. So here we are at the end of an excellent program, and we have a wonderful book to give away. And it's Don's book, and I tell you, I'm going to read it. So Abby, have you threw all names into like this virtual, pot. Who's the winner of the book? And the winner is, let's see if I can read it here. The winner is Ellen Winkler. So Ellen, we're happy to share the book with you. and we'll email you to get your address. Thank you, everyone, for showing up today. Stay safe. Have a wonderful holiday and rest up, because we need all your energy for the work ahead in 2022. Thank you.